Welcome to my channel, Welcome to that channel.
Rain had been falling on Lockdhu since 6:30 in the morning, which was hardly unusual. What was unusual was that Hamish Macbeth had been awake to see it. He considered this a personal injustice. At 8 o'clock, he stood behind the small police station, with his hands in the pockets of his ancient green jacket, watching the rain bounce off the bonnet of the police Land Rover. His red hair was damp, his boots were muddy, and there was a small saucepan tucked beneath his arm. The saucepan contained 3 eggs. The eggs had not been legally acquired. Hamish glanced towards the road. Empty. He glanced towards the station window. Empty. He then glanced at the hills beyond the village, which were disappearing beneath a curtain of mist. Perfect, he murmured. He lifted the saucepan and sniffed. Breakfast. He had been planning to poach the eggs over a small fire beside the lock when the telephone rang inside the station. Hamish froze. The ringing continued. Once, twice, 3 times. He looked at the telephone through the rain-streaked window. No, he said firmly. The telephone rang again. Hamish sighed. It was one of the unfortunate things about being a policeman. People expected you to answer telephones. He had considered becoming a fisherman, but fishermen were expected to work in bad weather. A shepherd had also seemed attractive, until he discovered that sheep required attention, so he had settled for being a policeman. Being a policeman in Lockdhu had its advantages. There were long stretches of time when nothing happened, and Hamish was very fond of those stretches. Unfortunately, nothing happening was not something headquarters in Strathbane approved of. The telephone stopped. Hamish smiled. Then it rang again. Oh, damn! He trudged inside. The station was cold. The fire had gone out during the night, and the damp seemed to have settled into the walls. Hamish put the saucepan down beside the stove and lifted the receiver. Lockdhu Police. Macbeth. Hamish closed his eyes. He knew that voice. Detective Chief Inspector Blair. Yes, sir. What are you doing? Police work. There was a pause. I've been told you're fishing. Hamish looked at the saucepan. Not at the moment. You're supposed to be patrolling. I was about to. You were about to? Yes, sir. When? Hamish considered this. Soon. Blair made a noise that suggested he was contemplating murder himself. I've got something for you. Hamish's heart sank. I've already got something. What? Breakfast. Macbeth. Yes, sir. I want you at Lockdhu Manor at 11. Hamish stared at the receiver. Why? A visitor arrived yesterday. English gentleman. Wealthy, buying the manor. So he's making inquiries about property in the area. That's not a crime. No. But he's causing trouble. Hamish brightened. Then perhaps someone else should deal with it. You're going. The line went dead. Hamish slowly replaced the receiver. Lockdhu Manor. He had never liked the place. Nobody in Lockdhu did. The manor stood on a rise beyond the village, surrounded by windswept trees and a stone wall that had collapsed in 3 places. It had been empty for years, though there were always rumors about it. Some said the old owner had hidden money there. Others claimed there was a sealed room in the east wing. Mrs. McLean, who ran the post office, swore that she had once heard a baby crying inside the house when nobody had lived there for 30 years. Hamish had never believed that story. He had, however, believed Mrs. McLean when she said the roof leaked. That was because she had once sold him a second-hand umbrella. It had leaked. He looked at the eggs, then at the clock. 10 minutes later, he was driving towards the manor. His dog, Lugs, sat beside him. Lugs was an enormous, ugly creature, with a face that suggested he had been disappointed by life from birth. Hamish glanced sideways. You're not going to enjoy this. Lugs yawned. Neither am I. The rain had eased by the time they reached the manor. The house appeared suddenly through the mist. It was larger than Hamish remembered. Grey stone walls rose beneath a dark slate roof. Ivy crawled over one side of the building, and several windows were boarded. The iron gates stood open. A black Bentley was parked beside the entrance. Hamish stared at it. Aye, he said. Lugs growled. Exactly. The front door opened before Hamish could knock. A tall man in his late 50s stood there. He wore a dark wool coat, polished shoes, and an expression of permanent irritation. Behind him stood a younger woman, with blonde hair and a clipboard. The man looked Hamish up and down. Then he looked at the Land Rover, then back at Hamish. You're the policeman. Aye. The man's eyebrows rose. Macbeth. Aye. I expected someone more. He stopped. Hamish waited. Professional, the man finished. Hamish smiled pleasantly. I get that a lot. The man did not smile. My name is Julian Weatherby. Hamish had heard of him. Everyone had. Julian Weatherby was an English property developer who had made a fortune buying old estates, renovating them, and selling them to people who had more money than sense. He had arrived in Lockdow 2 days earlier. By yesterday afternoon, he had already offended the butcher, the minister, and the owner of the hotel. That was an achievement. Hamish glanced beyond him into the manor. "You wanted to see me. I wanted the local police to be aware that there may be trespassing." "Anyone in particular?" "Villagers." Hamish blinked. "Villagers? Yes. They've been walking past this house for years. Not anymore." Weatherby's voice hardened. "This property is private." Hamish scratched his chin. "Of course. And I don't want people wandering around. I've already caught 2 men on the grounds." "Who?" "I don't know." Hamish smiled. "Then they could be anyone." Weatherby's expression darkened. "You find this amusing?" "No." Hamish looked at Luggs. Luggs was staring at Weatherby with deep suspicion. Luggs finds most things amusing. The younger woman suddenly laughed. Weatherby turned on her. "Miss Carter. Sorry." She stopped. Hamish noticed the reaction. Interesting. He looked at her more carefully. She was perhaps 35, expensively dressed, but not ostentatiously. Her hands were ink-stained. A secretary, perhaps? Or something else. "What do you want from me?" Hamish asked. "I want you to keep people away. I'll do my best." "That isn't good enough." Hamish shrugged. "It's usually all I have." Weatherby stared at him. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "You're a strange man, Macbeth." "Aye. Do you know what this house is worth?" "No." "Millions. That's a lot. More than this entire village." Hamish looked towards the road. "Probably." Weatherby seemed irritated by his lack of interest. "I intend to turn Lockdow Manor into the finest private estate in the Highlands." "Good for you. I'll need cooperation." "You'll get it." Weatherby raised an eyebrow. "Will I?" "No." Hamish smiled. "Not from me." For the first time, Weatherby looked genuinely amused. Then a sound came from somewhere inside the house. A dull thump. Everyone stopped. Hamish turned. What was that? Weatherby frowned. Probably the pipes. Another thump. This time louder. Luggs stood up. Hamish's expression changed. The lazy policeman had disappeared. He walked slowly into the hall. The interior of Lockdow Manor smelled of damp stone, old wood, and something faintly sweet. There were portraits along the walls. Dead people. Rich people. People who had owned the house before Julian Weatherby had decided he wanted it. Hamish looked at the staircase. Nothing. He looked towards the corridor. Nothing. Then he noticed something on the floor. A muddy footprint. Fresh. He crouched beside it. Weatherby came forward. "What is it?" "Someone's been inside." "I know that." "No." Hamish pointed. "This one's been inside today." The younger woman looked frightened. Weatherby looked angry. "Perhaps one of the workmen." "Are there workmen here?" "No." Hamish stood. The house was silent. Too silent. He walked towards the corridor. Luggs followed. Behind him, Weatherby said sharply, "Where are you going?" Hamish stopped. "To have a look." "I told you to keep people out." "Aye." Hamish turned his head. "That includes the dead ones." Weatherby stared at him. Hamish continued down the corridor. At the far end was a locked wooden door. He tried the handle. It did not move. "What room is this?" "The east study." Weatherby's voice had changed. Hamish noticed. So what? Why is it locked?" "Because it's private." Hamish looked at the door, then at Weatherby, then at the young woman. She was staring at the floor. Hamish smiled faintly. There was something about this house. Something that had nothing to do with property development. He could feel it, and he disliked the feeling. As he turned away, a small movement caught his eye. A piece of dark red fabric was caught beneath the door. Hamish crouched. He pulled it free. It was velvet, old-fashioned velvet, and there was a tiny brown stain on it. Hamish rubbed it between his fingers. Blood. He looked up. Weatherby had gone pale. "Where did you get that?" Hamish held up the cloth. "Under your door." For several seconds nobody spoke. Then, from somewhere above them, came a woman's voice. Soft. Terrified. "Mr. Weatherby." They all looked towards the staircase. "Me." The voice came again. "There is someone upstairs." Luggs began to growl. Hamish reached for the revolver beneath his jacket. He moved towards the stairs, and for the first time since arriving at Lockdow Manor, he stopped thinking about breakfast. Something was very wrong in the house, and whatever had left that piece of velvet beneath the locked door had not gone far. Chapter 2. A body in the East Wing. Hamish went up the stairs slowly. He had discovered that running towards trouble only encouraged trouble to run faster. There was also breakfast. The eggs were still sitting in the Land Rover, and Hamish had no intention of allowing a murder, attempted murder, or even a moderately unpleasant argument to spoil them. Lugs followed close behind. At the top of the stairs stood Miss Carter, gripping the banister. "Where?" Hamish asked. She pointed towards the long gallery. Someone was there. Who? "I don't know." Hamish looked down the gallery. Tall windows rattled in the wind. Portraits stared from dark frames. A grandfather clock ticked with exaggerated importance. "Did you see a face?" "No." "A shape?" "Yes." "Man or woman?" "I couldn't tell." "Useful." She looked offended. Hamish smiled apologetically. "Sorry. Policeman's joke." It wasn't, but she seemed relieved. Weatherby came up behind them. "Macbeth? This is ridiculous. There is nobody here." Hamish glanced at him. "You've checked?" "Of course." "When?" "Just now." "Then you should be good at it." Weatherby frowned. Hamish walked along the gallery. A door stood open at the far end. He stopped. "Was that open before?" Miss Carter shook her head. Weatherby said nothing. Hamish noticed. He crossed the distance and entered the room. It was a bedroom. An old one. Dusty curtains hung around a four-poster bed. A fire had been laid but not lit. On the dressing table stood a silver-backed hairbrush. Although Hamish doubted anyone had used it in decades, the window was open. Rain had blown across the floor. Hamish approached it. Below lay a steep bank of wet grass leading towards the trees. Nobody could have climbed up without leaving marks. He looked down. There were footprints. Fresh ones. They came from the garden and ended beneath the window. Hamish crouched. The prints were narrow. Too narrow for Weatherby's broad shoes. Too large for Miss Carter's elegant boots. "Someone came in this way," he said. Weatherby appeared behind him. "Or left." "Aye." Hamish pointed. "Either way, your security isn't very impressive." "I haven't had time to install security." "Then perhaps you should lock the windows." Weatherby looked annoyed. Hamish stood and turned back towards the gallery. A faint sound came from downstairs. Then a crash. Miss Carter screamed. Hamish ran. This time he did not worry about encouraging trouble. He reached the entrance hall and found Weatherby standing beside a fallen chair. The front door was open. Rain blew across the flagstones. "What happened?" Hamish asked. "I heard something," Weatherby said. Hamish looked at the open door. "Did you see anyone?" "No." He stepped outside. A figure moved among the trees. Hamish shouted. The figure ran. Hamish followed. Rain had returned, turning the ground to mud. Branches slapped his face. Behind him, lugs barked furiously. Hamish was faster than he looked. The figure reached the stone wall and scrambled over. Hamish arrived seconds later. On the other side was empty moorland. He looked down. A torn piece of black cloth hung from the wall. He pulled it free. Then he heard Lugs barking. Lugs! The dog had returned to the manor. Hamish hurried back. Inside, the hallway had filled with people. 2 workmen had arrived from the village. The minister was there. So was Mrs. McLean from the post office, who had apparently travelled faster than any emergency vehicle known to man. Hamish stared at her. "How did you get here?" "I heard there was trouble." "You heard that already?" Mrs. McLean looked innocent. "I've got ears." Hamish sighed. "Where's Weatherby?" She pointed towards the east wing. He went to find Miss Carter. Hamish's stomach tightened. He hurried along the corridor. The door to the east study was still locked, but the key was gone. He looked at the floor. Mud. Fresh mud. And beneath it, something else. A smear of blood. Hamish reached for the handle. The door opened. Weatherby stood inside. He was staring at the desk. Beside it lay Miss Carter. She was motionless. Nobody moved. Then Hamish crossed the room and knelt beside her. He checked her pulse. Nothing. "She's dead," he said. Weatherby backed against the desk. "This can't be happening." Hamish looked around. The room was neat. There was no overturned furniture, no broken glass, no obvious weapon. On the desk sat a crystal whiskey glass. Beside it was an envelope. Hamish picked it up. His eyes narrowed. The envelope was addressed to Julian Weatherby. No stamp, no handwriting. 3 words. "You should have left." Hamish looked at Weatherby. The Englishman had gone white. "Did you know her?" Weatherby swallowed. "She worked for me." "That's not what I asked." "She was my secretary." "Was she afraid of you?" "No." Hamish studied his face. Weatherby looked frightened. But Hamish had learned long ago that fear and guilt often wore the same expression. He looked at the dead woman again. Her right hand was clenched. Something was inside it. Hamish opened her fingers. A brass key lay in her palm. Weatherby saw it. His face changed. Hamish noticed. That's interesting. I don't know what it is. Didn't say you did. Hamish slipped the key into his pocket. Then he looked at the locked study door. He had a sudden thought. The room had been locked. The key had been missing. Miss Carter had been inside. And now she was dead. But there was one thing that bothered him more than the murder. The window was shut. He walked over and examined it. No mud on the sill. No footprints. Nobody had escaped through it. He turned back. The killer had entered somehow, and had left somehow. Hamish looked at the 3 words on the envelope. You should have left. Perhaps they had not been written for Weatherby. Perhaps they had been written for someone else. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Hamish sighed. His peaceful morning was gone. So was his breakfast. He felt sorry. Chapter 3. The Chief Inspector arrives. By noon, Lockdew Manor had acquired the atmosphere of a badly organized funeral. Rain drummed on the roof. The villagers crowded into the entrance hall, whispering behind their hands, while Hamish stood beside the study door and wondered whether anyone would notice if he slipped away. They did. Mrs. McLean caught him by the sleeve. You're not going, are you? I was thinking about it. There's a dead woman upstairs. Aye. And a murderer somewhere about. Aye. So you can't leave. Hamish looked at her sadly. That is exactly the sort of sensible reasoning I was afraid of. Before she could answer, the sound of a motor car came from the drive. Hamish closed his eyes. Blair. A large police car stopped outside. DCI Blair emerged with 2 uniformed officers and a detective sergeant carrying a case. Blair was a broad, red-faced man whose moustache seemed permanently offended by the weather. He marched into the manor. Where's the body? East study. Who found her? I did. Of course you did. Blair removed his wet hat. What have you touched? An envelope. Blair stared at him. What else? A key. Blair's face reddened. You touched evidence? I was checking her hand. You don't check evidence. You preserve it. Hamish shrugged. She wasn't complaining. One of the officers snorted. Blair glared at him. Macbeth. This is a murder investigation. I don't want you interfering. I wouldn't dream of it. Good. Blair turned towards Weatherby. Mr. Weatherby? Yes. I'm DCI Blair. I was expecting you. I imagine you were. Weatherby glanced at Hamish. I requested someone competent. Blair smiled. You've got me. Hamish coughed. Blair ignored him. What happened? Weatherby gave his account. He described the strange noise upstairs, the frightened secretary, the open front door, and the chase. He carefully omitted nothing that made him appear innocent. Hamish listened. There was one thing missing. Weatherby never mentioned the red velvet. Interesting. Blair questioned Miss Carter's employer for nearly 20 minutes. Then he announced his conclusion. It was someone from the village. The room fell silent. Hamish looked at him. Why? Because the property was trespassed upon before the murder. We have footprints, an intruder, and witnesses who saw someone fleeing. Did they? Blair frowned. Did they what? See someone fleeing? We know someone ran. We know I ran after someone. Blair stared. Hamish smiled mildly. That's different. Blair turned to the sergeant. Take statements from everyone. He pointed at Weatherby. You stay here. Then at Hamish. You stay out of my way. Hamish nodded. Aye. Blair walked away. Mrs. McLean leaned towards Hamish. He'll arrest young Angus Fraser. Why? Because he doesn't like him. Does Angus like him? No. Then Blair will probably be right about one thing. What? Angus doesn't like him. Mrs. McLean lowered her voice. Do you think Angus did it? No. Why not? Hamish looked towards the study. Because he's too stupid. Mrs. McLean smiled. You're fond of him. Not especially. You are. Hamish sighed. Don't spread that around. In the study, Blair began examining the scene. Hamish remained outside. He had no desire to be shouted at again. Instead, he wandered towards the kitchen. The smell of coffee reached him. He followed it. A cook was standing beside the stove, trembling. Tea? Hamish asked. Coffee. Even better. She poured him a cup. What happened here? Hamish asked. I don't know. Who is she? Miss Carter. Did you like her? The cook hesitated. Yes. Did Mr. Weatherby? I don't know. Hamish drank. The coffee was strong enough to remove paint. He liked it. Was she frightened? Sometimes. Of what? The cook looked towards the corridor. Mr. Weatherby. Hamish stopped drinking. Why? She found things. What things? Letters. What sort? I don't know. The cook lowered her voice. She said this house had secrets. Hamish smiled. Most old houses do. She said one secret was still alive. Hamish put down the cup. Did she say where? The cook shook her head. Then footsteps sounded outside. Blair entered. Macbeth. I've got your suspect. Hamish sighed. Who? Angus Fraser. I thought so. He was seen near the manor yesterday. Lots of people were. He threatened Weatherby. Did he? Yes. What did he say? Blair frowned. He told him to leave Lockdow. Hamish considered this. That sounds like Angus. You know him. Aye. Then you'll know he has a temper. He does. And a history of violence, mostly against fences. Blair stepped closer. You're defending him. No. You are. Hamish smiled. I just don't think he's your murderer. Why? Because he would have left his boots behind. Blair stared. What does that mean? Angus has the biggest feet in Lockdow. The sergeant laughed. Blair did not. Then a shout came from upstairs. Everyone froze. A moment later, the sergeant appeared on the stairs. Sir! Blair hurried towards him. Hamish followed. What is it? The sergeant pointed at the study. The window! Hamish entered. The window was open. Blair stared. That was closed. Hamish said nothing. He crossed to the sill. There, caught beneath the frame, was a small silver button. He picked it up. Then he noticed something else. A wet footprint. Tiny, almost child-sized. It led from the window towards the desk. Hamish looked at the dead woman, then at Weatherby. The Englishman was watching him. And for the first time, Hamish saw something in Weatherby's eyes that looked less like fear than recognition. You've seen that button before, Hamish said. Weatherby did not answer. Blair turned sharply. Mr. Weatherby. Still nothing. Hamish slipped his hands into his pockets. The investigation had begun properly now. And Hamish had just found the first lie. Outside, the rain thickened over the hills, hiding the road and the distant loch. Hamish watched the mist gather against the glass. Somewhere beyond the manor walls, somebody knew exactly what had happened. Hamish only hoped that person was not planning another death before supper. And annoyingly, he was hungry again already. Chapter 4. The village knows everything. By 3 o'clock, the rain had settled into the sort of steady drizzle that made Scotland look as though it had been forgotten in the wash. Hamish left Lockdow Manor. He had been ordered to leave. Blair had said, "Go back to your station and stay there." Hamish had replied, "Aye." Neither man had believed the other. He drove into the village with Lugs asleep beside him. At the police station, the telephone rang. Hamish looked at it. It stopped. He smiled. Then it rang again. "Persistent devil," he answered. "Lockdow Police." It was Blair. "Macbeth, I want you to speak to the locals." Hamish brightened. "About the murder? About Weatherby? What about him?" "Everything. His business, his habits, his enemies. Find out whether anyone had a reason to threaten him." Hamish frowned. "Why me?" "Because nobody in Lockdow tells the truth to a uniformed detective from Strathbane. That sounds like a compliment." "It isn't." The line went dead. Hamish put on his jacket. Lugs opened one eye. "Come on." The dog did not move. Hamish sighed. "Fine." He walked to the hotel. The bar was nearly empty, apart from Mrs. Anderson, the owner, and 3 villagers who became silent the instant Hamish entered. "Coffee," he said. Mrs. Anderson poured it. "Anything to eat?" "Soup." "What kind?" "Vegetable." Hamish considered. "Then I'll have whiskey." Mrs. Anderson laughed. The 3 villagers did not. Hamish sat at the end of the bar. "Terrible business," he said. Nobody answered. "Lovely weather." Still nothing. He sipped his whiskey. Weatherby was an unpleasant man. One of the villagers, Angus Fraser, grunted. He was worse than unpleasant. Hamish looked at him. "That's strong. He told me I was trespassing." "Were you?" "I was walking on the road." "Which road?" "The one beside the manor." Hamish nodded. "Public road." "Aye." Angus's face darkened. He came out shouting. "Said the whole place belonged to him." "Did you threaten him?" "I told him he'd regret coming here." "Did you mean it?" "Aye." Hamish smiled. "That is unfortunate." Angus stared. "Why?" "Because you're exactly the sort of man Blair likes arresting." Angus swore. Hamish raised his cup. "I'm only warning you." Mrs. Anderson leaned over the counter. "Weatherby had enemies before he came here." "Who?" "I don't know." "That's not useful." "It might be." She wiped a glass. "He came into the hotel 2 nights ago with a man." "What man?" "Older, thin, grey hair." "Name?" "Didn't give one." What did they discuss? Money. Mrs. Anderson looked around. Then Weatherby said something about the manor being worth more than anyone knew. Hamish frowned. More than its market value. No. She lowered her voice. More than the house. Angus looked interested. Hamish finished his coffee. He walked to the post office next. Mrs. McLean was sorting letters. She looked up. I knew you'd come. I'm predictable. No. You're hungry. Hamish looked at her. How do you know? You always investigate from the direction of food. She handed him a biscuit. He accepted it. Tell me about Weatherby. He bought the manor, so I hear. He didn't buy it. Hamish stopped chewing. What? Not yet. Then why did he say he owned it? He had an option. Who owns it? Mrs. McLean lowered her voice. Lady Agnes. She's still alive. Aye. Where is she? Nobody knows. That seems inconvenient. It is. Mrs. McLean handed him another biscuit. There's more. Go on. Miss Carter came here yesterday. What did she want? She asked about the old manor records. What records? Property transfers. Hamish frowned. Why? She said Weatherby was lying. About owning the house. No. About what? Mrs. McLean shook her head. She wouldn't say. Did she mention the East study? Mrs. McLean's expression changed. Yes. What did she say? She asked whether it had always been locked. And? I told her no. Hamish stared at her. When was it locked? 27 years ago. Why? Mrs. McLean looked towards the window. Because of the fire. What fire? The fire nobody talks about. Hamish sighed. He was beginning to dislike old houses. They always had fires. Secrets and dead relatives. Who died? A servant. Name? Ewan McCrae. Hamish knew the name. Everyone did. Ewan McCrae had supposedly disappeared after stealing money from the manor. Mrs. McLean shook her head. He didn't steal anything. Then what happened? He knew something. What? I don't know. Hamish smiled. That is becoming a popular answer. Blair was waiting. Anything? Hamish removed his wet coat. Plenty. Blair looked impatient. Well? Angus threatened Weatherby. I knew that. Miss Carter was investigating old property records. Blair frowned. What property records? Those concerning Lockdew Manor. Why? Apparently Weatherby didn't own it. Blair stared. That can't be right. That's what Mrs. McLean says. Who is Mrs. McLean? Hamish looked offended. You've been in Lockdew for years. Answer the question. The post mistress. Blair rubbed his forehead. Anything else? Hamish thought about the old fire. The East study was locked 27 years ago. Why? Because a servant died. Blair looked at him sharply. What servant? Ewan McCrae. Blair became very still. Hamish noticed. You know the name. Blair looked away. No, you do. I said no. Hamish smiled. That was a quick answer. Blair slammed a folder onto the desk. Weatherby has a financial dispute with the previous owners. That's enough motive. For murder? Yes, maybe. Blair pointed at him. Don't start. Hamish picked up the folder. Inside was a photograph. It showed Weatherby standing beside the manor. Beside him stood Miss Carter. And behind them, almost hidden beneath the shadow of the doorway, was an old man with grey hair. Hamish recognized him immediately. The stranger from the hotel. He looked at Blair. Who is he? Blair took the photograph back. I don't know. Hamish smiled faintly. That was the second lie he had heard that day already. And this one was much more interesting. Chapter 5. The Boy Who Survived. Hamish spent the next hour doing what Blair considered the least useful form of police work imaginable. He drank coffee. He ate a scone. Hamish thought the third reason had considerable merit. The photograph Blair had shown him would not leave his mind. The grey-haired man standing behind Weatherby and Miss Carter was the same man Mrs. Anderson had seen at the hotel. He asked Mrs. Anderson for another coffee. You'll be floating away, she said. I'll be warm first. You've been staring at that photograph for 10 minutes. So are most people. Mrs. Anderson leaned across the counter. Do you know who the old man is? No. He came here yesterday. I know. A man without luggage, asking for a room. He said he wouldn't be staying. Fraser. Hamish straightened. Angus. No. Thomas Fraser. Related. Angus's uncle. Hamish groaned. Of course. He found Thomas Fraser at the harbour, sitting beneath the shelter while rain blew across the water. He was a thin man in his 70s, with a weather-beaten face and clear blue eyes. Mr. Fraser? The old man looked up. I'm Hamish Macbeth. I know. Then you know why I'm here. Because someone has been murdered. Miss Carter. Thomas looked towards the lock. She was asking questions. What sort? About the manor. Everybody seems interested in that house. The old man finally said, "My brother worked there." "Ewan McCrae?" Thomas nodded. "He didn't steal anything." "What happened to him?" "He vanished. 27 years ago." "Aye. Was there a fire?" "There was. And Ewan disappeared afterward." "He disappeared during it." Hamish frowned. "That's not the same thing." Thomas gave him a sideways look. "You notice things. Sometimes. Ewan found something in the east study." "What?" "I never knew." "Did he say what the secret was?" "No." "Did he leave anything behind?" Thomas hesitated. "A letter." "Where is it?" "Gone." "Who took it?" "I don't know." Hamish studied him. Thomas looked straight ahead. "You do know." The old man smiled sadly. "You're not as lazy as you look. Please don't tell anyone." "Why? I have a reputation." Thomas laughed quietly. Then his expression changed. "Miss Carter came to me last night. What did she want?" "The same thing you want." "The truth?" "No." Thomas turned. "She wanted the key." Hamish's heart gave a small jump. "What key?" "The east study key." Hamish remembered the brass key clenched in Miss Carter's dead hand. "You gave it to her?" "No." "Then where did she get it?" Thomas stared at him. "You found it." Hamish said nothing. "She had it because she wanted to return it." "To whom?" "Weatherby." "Why?" "Because Weatherby knew where the old papers were." "What old papers?" Thomas stood. "The ones that proved the manor was never his to buy." He walked away before Hamish could ask another question. Hamish watched him disappear into the rain. Then he noticed someone standing across the harbour. A woman. Dark coat, red scarf. She turned when Hamish looked at her, and walked quickly away. Hamish followed. He found her near the churchyard. "Excuse me." She stopped. Her face was pale. "You're the policeman." "Aye. You should leave this alone." "People keep telling me that." "Then listen." Hamish looked at her red scarf. "Were you at the manor?" "No." "Were you at the hotel?" "No." "You're lying." She stared at him. Then she whispered. "Miss Carter knew about the child." Hamish felt the cold deepen. "What child?" "The one who died in the fire." "What was her name?" The woman shook her head. "Ask Weatherby." "Who are you?" But she was already walking away. Hamish let her go. He had learned that frightened people rarely became more truthful when chased. Back at the station he found Blair waiting. "Where have you been?" "Talking." "With whom?" "People." Blair glared. "I've arrested Angus Fraser." Hamish sighed. "On what evidence?" "He threatened Weatherby." "That isn't murder." "He was seen near the manor. Half the village was. He had blood on his jacket." Hamish stared. "What kind?" Blair looked irritated. "Blood." "Human?" "We're waiting for confirmation." Hamish sat down. "Then you haven't got a murder weapon, a motive or proof that Angus killed anyone?" Blair leaned forward. "You're protecting him." "No." "Then why are you so interested?" Hamish looked at the rain running down the window. "Because you're missing something." "What?" Hamish thought about the dead secretary, the locked study, the old fire, the key, the mysterious child, and the woman with the red scarf. "I don't know yet." Blair laughed. "Then stop pretending you're clever." Hamish smiled. "I'm not pretending." That evening, Hamish returned to the manor alone. He parked behind the kitchen and entered through a side door. He walked towards the east study. The door was locked again. Hamish took out the brass key. It fitted perfectly. He turned it. The lock clicked. Inside, the room smelled faintly of smoke. Hamish closed the door behind him. On the wall hung an old portrait. A woman. A child. And beside them stood a younger version of the grey-haired man from the photograph. Hamish stepped closer. Behind the portrait, something scratched against the wall. He lifted it carefully. A narrow cavity had been cut into the stone. Inside lay a bundle of letters. The first envelope bore a date from 27 years earlier. The second carried the name Ewan McCrae. The third had only 4 words. "For the boy who survived." Hamish stared at it. Someone had followed him. Chapter 6. The boy who survived. Hamish did not turn around. He stood still in the east study, one hand resting against the old portrait, and the other hovering above the bundle of letters. Behind him, the floorboard creaked again. "Good evening," he said. There was no answer. Hamish glanced at the window. Rain rattled against the glass. The door remained closed. Whoever had followed him was inside the room. He reached slowly into his pocket. His fingers found the small torch he carried for emergencies. He switched it off. "I'm afraid you've caught me at a disadvantage," Hamish said. "I can't see a thing." A breath sounded behind him. Hamish turned sharply and swept the torch across the room. Nobody. The curtains moved. He crossed towards them, and pulled one aside. The window was shut. He checked the floor. Nothing. Then something struck him from behind. Hamish staggered forward. A hand caught his shoulder. He spun and grabbed the attacker's wrist. The man swore. Hamish recognized the voice. Thomas Fraser. The old man jerked free. You shouldn't have come here. I've been told that several times today. You don't understand. That's why I'm asking questions. Thomas looked at the letters. You found them. Aye. They must never leave this house. Hamish picked up the envelope marked for the boy who survived. Who was the boy? Thomas stared at him. My nephew. Angus? No. Hamish waited. Thomas sat heavily in a chair. There was another child. Ewan's son? Thomas nodded. His name was David. What happened to him? He survived the fire. Hamish looked towards the portrait. Then why have I never heard of him? Because everyone believed he died. Everyone? Almost everyone. Hamish opened the first letter. Thomas reached for it. No. Hamish held it away. You don't get to tell a policeman what he can read after somebody has been murdered. This isn't ordinary evidence. That is becoming obvious. Hamish unfolded the paper. The handwriting was cramped and hurried. He read silently. The letter described a dispute over ownership of the manor. It mentioned money, forged documents, and a child whose identity had been concealed. Then Hamish reached the final paragraph. He stopped. What? Thomas looked frightened. Ewan knew the child was not dead. Where was he? I don't know. You must. I swear I don't. A sound came from the corridor. Both men froze. Hamish extinguished the torch. Footsteps approached. Slowly. 3 steps. Then silence. Thomas whispered, We have to go. Hamish shook his head. No. The handle moved. Hamish positioned himself beside the door. It opened. A figure entered carrying a lantern. Hamish lunged. The lantern fell. The figure struck him across the face. Hamish caught the attacker's coat and pulled. The man stumbled backwards. For one brief second, the lantern light revealed his face. Grey hair, sharp eyes. The same man from the photograph. He escaped into the corridor. Hamish chased him. The stranger ran down the stairs. Thomas followed more slowly. Stop. The man reached the front door. Hamish caught his sleeve. The cloth tore. The stranger turned and punched him. Hamish fell against the wall. By the time he recovered, the door was open and the man had vanished into the rain. Hamish looked at the torn sleeve. Dark wool. Expensive. Well, he said, that's one way to introduce yourself. Thomas came down the stairs. Are you hurt? Only my dignity. That can be repaired. I doubt it. Hamish looked at the torn cloth. Who is he? Thomas said nothing. Tell me. He is Julian Weatherby's father. Hamish stared. That is impossible. He died 20 years ago. Hamish looked towards the rain. Apparently he changed his mind. Thomas lowered his voice. His name was Edward Weatherby. Hamish returned to the study. The bundle of letters was still on the desk, but one was missing, the letter addressed to David. Hamish checked the floor. Nothing. Thomas shook his head. He took it. Why? Because it tells the truth. Which is? Thomas hesitated. David was the rightful heir. Hamish sat down. Weatherby had not come to Lockdoop to buy the manor. He had come to secure it. Perhaps Miss Carter had discovered the truth. Perhaps she had threatened him. Perhaps she had been killed, because she knew where the papers were. But one question remained. Where is David? Thomas looked towards the portrait. He is closer than you think. Hamish frowned. What does that mean? Thomas would not answer. Instead, he walked towards the door. Before leaving, he said, Ask yourself why Miss Carter was carrying the key. Then he disappeared. Hamish remained alone. He examined the portrait again. The woman was Lady Agnes. The little girl beside her was unknown. The young man was Edward Weatherby. But there was another figure. A small boy stood partly hidden behind the woman. David. Hamish leaned closer. Around the boy's neck hung a silver pendant. A tiny stag. Hamish remembered something. Miss Carter had worn the same pendant. He sat back. Damn. The clue had been in front of him all along. Miss Carter had not been merely Weatherby's secretary. She had been searching for the surviving heir. And perhaps she had found him. Hamish took the letters and slipped them inside his jacket. Then he heard footsteps outside. He extinguished the lamp. A shadow passed beneath the door. Hamish waited. The door opened slowly. Nobody entered. Instead, a folded piece of paper slid across the floor. Hamish picked it up. There were only 6 words. The boy is in Lockdoop. Hamish stared at the message. For the first time he understood the real danger. The murderer was not searching for the manor. He was searching for a person. And if David McCrae was alive, someone intended to make certain he stayed hidden. Hamish slipped the note into his pocket. Then he remembered something else. The woman at the churchyard had called Miss Carter by another name. Hamish suddenly knew where he needed to go. Hamish smiled. He was going to disappoint him. But first, he needed coffee, and preferably something stronger. Chapter 7. The Air in the Mist. Hamish went to the churchyard. He found the woman with the red scarf standing beneath an ash tree. "You came back," she said. "Aye. You shouldn't have. I've been hearing that all day." She looked towards the church. Miss Carter knew. Knew what? That Julian Weatherby wasn't buying the manor for himself. Who was he buying it for? She shook her head. "You have to stop asking questions. That's awkward. I'm a policeman. You don't understand who you're dealing with." Hamish leaned against the stone wall. "Then explain it." The woman looked at him for several seconds. "My name is Fiona McCrae." Hamish felt a chill. "Ewan McCrae's daughter?" She nodded. "But the boy, David, was my brother." Hamish stared. "You're the child from the fire." "No, David was." "Where is he?" "I don't know." Hamish studied her face. "You do." Fiona's eyes filled with tears. "He was taken away." "By whom?" "By my mother." "Why?" "To save him. From the fire. From the people who started it." Hamish straightened. "Who started the fire?" Fiona whispered. "The Weatherbys." The rain tapped against the leaves. "Why?" "Because my father discovered the truth about the manor." Hamish waited. Fiona continued. "Lady Agnes had no children. Her husband had died, and the estate was supposed to pass to the nearest legitimate relative. That was my father. But the Weatherbys wanted the property. Money? Power." Hamish nodded. "That is usually more expensive." Fiona almost smiled. "My father found documents proving the Weatherbys had forged the ownership papers. And the fire? They tried to destroy the evidence." "Your father died." "Yes." "Your brother survived." "Yes." "Then why hide him?" "Because Edward Weatherby believed David was dead. My mother took him away before anyone could find him." "Where?" Fiona looked towards the village. "Somewhere safe." Hamish sighed. "That is becoming another popular answer." She reached into her coat and produced a photograph. "This belonged to Miss Carter." Hamish took it. It showed a young man standing beside a fishing boat. The face was unfamiliar. "David?" "No." "Then who?" "His son." Hamish looked at her. "His son?" Fiona nodded. "David had a child." Hamish felt the case shift beneath his feet. "Where is he?" "Lockdu." "Who?" "I can't tell you." "Why?" "Because the person protecting him is the same person who killed Miss Carter." Hamish stared at the photograph. "Then why tell me?" "Because I think the killer knows you found the letters." A voice came from behind the church. "Macbeth." Hamish turned. Blair was walking towards them. Fiona stepped backward. "Don't trust him." "Who?" But she had already disappeared between the gravestones. Blair reached Hamish. "Who was that?" "Nobody." "I saw her." "So did I." Blair's face reddened. "Where's Weatherby?" "At the manor, presumably." "He's gone." Hamish looked at him. "Gone where?" "We don't know." "Convenient." Blair glared. "What have you been doing?" "Investigating." "You were ordered to stay out of this." "I did." "You're carrying something." Hamish smiled. "Coffee." Blair reached for his pocket. Hamish stepped back. "Don't." "What have you got?" "Nothing." "Macbeth." Hamish sighed. "It's better if you don't know." Blair's expression hardened. "That is precisely why you're useless." He turned away. "Weatherby's car has been found abandoned near the old quarry." Hamish looked towards the hills. "Anyone with it?" "No." "Blood?" "None." "Then he wasn't attacked there." Blair frowned. "How do you know?" "Because people don't usually leave their cars at quarries when they've been murdered." "That's not evidence." "No." Hamish smiled. "It's common sense." They drove to the quarry. The road was narrow and slick with rain. Mist covered the hillside, and the stone pit appeared suddenly through it, black and silent. Weatherby's Bentley stood beside the fence. The driver's door was open. Hamish approached carefully. On the seat lay a leather wallet, empty. Beside it was a scrap of paper. Blair picked it up. "What does it say?" Hamish leaned closer. "Come alone." Blair looked around. "Who wrote it?" "Someone expecting Weatherby." "Then where is he?" Hamish looked over the quarry edge. At the bottom, rainwater had collected in a dark pool. Nothing moved. Then Lugs barked. The dog was standing beside the fence. Hamish hurried over. Something was caught in the wire, a piece of red wool, the same color as Fiona's scarf. Blair grabbed it. "She's involved." "Maybe." "You saw her here." "No." You're lying. Hamish looked at him. I'm beginning to think everyone is. A cry came from below. Both men turned. A figure was moving among the rocks. Blair drew his revolver. Stop. The figure ran. Hamish followed. They scrambled down the wet slope. Stones rolled beneath their boots. The stranger reached the water and turned. It was Weatherby. His face was bruised. His coat was torn. Don't shoot, he shouted. Blair stopped. Hamish approached. Who attacked you? Weatherby stared at him. I don't know. Hamish smiled. You're learning. What? That's what everyone says when they know more than they're telling. Weatherby looked towards the road. Get me out of here. Why? Because they're coming. Who? Weatherby swallowed. The people who own the manor. Hamish stared. You said you owned it. I was wrong. That's interesting. Weatherby looked at him desperately. They have David. Hamish's expression changed. Where? I don't know. Then what do you know? Weatherby whispered. The boy is alive. A shot cracked through the mist. Weatherby fell. Hamish dropped beside him. The bullet had struck his shoulder. Blair shouted towards the hillside. Police! Stay where you are. Another shot echoed. Then silence. Hamish looked at Weatherby. The Englishman was conscious. Who fired? Weatherby shook his head. I never saw him. Hamish glanced at the mist. The killer had missed Weatherby's heart. That was no accident. Someone wanted him alive. At least for now. Hamish stood. He looked at Blair. We're going back to the manor. Why? Because the killer has already gone there. And this time Hamish was certain. Chapter 8. The Empty Nursery. Hamish returned to Lockdow Manor with Blair, Weatherby, and 2 constables following close behind. The rain had stopped, but mist clung to the hills and drifted across the drive like smoke. Hamish disliked it. Mist was useful to killers and inconvenient to policemen. Weatherby sat in the back of the Land Rover, one hand pressed against his wounded shoulder. He had become remarkably quiet. Hamish glanced at him through the mirror. You're not going to tell us anything? Weatherby stared at the floor. I've told you enough. Not really. Blair turned from the passenger seat. Macbeth, leave him alone. Aye. Hamish smiled. I was only being friendly. They reached the manor. The front door stood open. Nobody had left it that way. Hamish stopped before entering. Stay here. Blair looked annoyed. I'm in charge. Aye. Hamish pointed towards the open doorway. So you go first. Blair glared at him, then motioned to the constables. They entered. Nothing moved. The hall was cold and silent. A portrait had been knocked from the wall. Glass covered the floor. Hamish looked at it. The portrait showed Lady Agnes holding a child. The child's face had been scratched away. That's new, Hamish said. Blair examined the damaged painting. Someone's searching for something. Hamish shook his head. Someone's searching for someone. He walked towards the staircase. A faint smell reached him. Smoke. He stopped. Do you smell that? Blair sniffed. Fire. Aye. They followed it upstairs. The smell grew stronger near the east wing. The door to the study stood open. Inside, drawers had been pulled out and papers scattered across the floor. The hidden cavity behind the portrait had been emptied. Hamish stared. The letters are gone. Blair looked at him. What letters? Hamish ignored him. Something else caught his attention. A small trail of ash led from the study towards the corridor. He followed it. The trail ended at another door. A nursery. Hamish pushed it open. The room had been abandoned for decades. A wooden cot stood beside the wall. A faded toy horse lay beneath the window. Dust covered everything except one chair. Someone had been sitting there recently. Hamish touched the cushion. Warm. He turned. Someone's here. Blair raised his weapon. They searched the room. Nothing. Then Hamish noticed the wardrobe. Its doors were slightly open. He crossed the room and pulled them apart. A narrow passage had been hidden behind it. Blair swore. Where does that lead? Hamish looked inside. Somewhere inconvenient. They entered. The passage descended behind the walls of the manor. It smelled of damp earth and old smoke. Hamish moved carefully, holding his torch low. After several yards, they reached a stone chamber. There was a table, 2 chairs, and a candle still burning. Someone had been there moments earlier. On the table lay a silver stag pendant. Hamish picked it up. Blair stared. What is it? Miss Carter wore one. Blair's expression changed. Then she had been here. Hamish nodded. But why? He searched the table. A folded document lay beneath the candle. It was an old birth certificate. The name was David McCrae. Hamish read the date. Then he looked at Blair. He survived. Blair stared at the paper. 27 years ago. A noise came from behind them. Gominje. They turned. The passage entrance was blocked. Someone had closed the door. Blair rushed forward and pulled the handle. Locked. Hamish sighed. That's becoming a habit. Smoke began creeping beneath the door. Blair shouted, "Open it!" No answer. The smoke thickened. Hamish looked around the chamber. There had to be another exit. He found one behind the table. A small opening. Too narrow for Blair. Hamish smiled. "I'm going." Macbeth. Hamish crawled through. The passage was barely wide enough for his shoulders. He moved through darkness, while smoke followed him. After several yards, he emerged behind a stone wall in the old chapel. He stood and coughed. Lugs barked from somewhere nearby. Hamish opened the chapel door. The dog rushed towards him. "Good lad." Blair appeared moments later, furious and covered in soot. "Where were you?" "Taking the scenic route." Blair grabbed his arm. "Who's behind this?" Hamish looked towards the manor. "I don't know." "You do." "No." Blair stared at him. Hamish held up the birth certificate. "But I know what they're fighting over." That evening, the village gathered at the hotel. News of Weatherby's shooting had traveled faster than the rain. Hamish sat beside the stove with coffee and listened. Nobody mentioned the manor. Nobody mentioned David. But people were whispering. He caught fragments. "McRae. Alive. After all these years." Then the door opened. Fiona McRae entered. She looked directly at Hamish. "You found it?" "Aye. Then you know." "Not enough." She sat opposite him. "David is alive." "I know. He came back to Lockdow 3 weeks ago." Hamish stared. "Where is he now?" Fiona looked towards the window. "With the person who raised him." "Who?" She hesitated. "Mrs. Anderson." Hamish nearly dropped his coffee. "The hotel owner." Fiona nodded. "She took him in after the fire. She knew who he was. But she kept his identity secret." Hamish looked across the bar. Mrs. Anderson was standing behind the counter. Their eyes met. She did not look surprised. Hamish walked over. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I promised his mother." "Where is David?" Mrs. Anderson's face tightened. "Gone." "When?" "Tonight." Hamish looked at the clock. "How long ago?" "An hour." "Where did he go?" "I don't know." Hamish sighed. Everyone in Lockdow seemed to know something except him. Then Mrs. Anderson leaned closer. "He left a message. For me?" She nodded. Hamish opened the folded paper. Only one sentence was written. "I know who killed Miss Carter." Hamish looked up. "Where is he going?" Mrs. Anderson whispered. "The manor." Hamish grabbed his coat. Outside, the mist had returned. And somewhere inside Lockdow Manor, the surviving heir was walking straight into the hands of a murderer. Again. Chapter 9. The Trap in the Drawing Room. Hamish drove towards Lockdow Manor, through thickening mist. Blair followed behind, complaining over the radio. Hamish ignored him. He thought about David. If David knew who had killed Miss Carter, then the murderer would know that David knew. That made the young man a target. The killer knew the secret passages, locked rooms, and old history. They belonged to Lockdow Manor. When Hamish reached the gates, he switched off the headlights. The house stood black against the mist. Hamish climbed out. Lugs growled. "Quietly," Hamish whispered. They approached the front door. It was unlocked. Inside, the manor seemed deserted. Then he heard a faint movement above. He climbed the stairs. At the top, he saw David, a young man with dark hair and a pale face. "David." The man turned. "You shouldn't have come." "I keep hearing it." David smiled weakly. "Miss Carter said you would find me." "She knew?" "Yes." "Where is she?" David looked down. "Dead." "I know." David swallowed. "She discovered the documents proving my father was the rightful heir. She wanted to expose Weatherby." "Why didn't she?" "Because she trusted the wrong person." Hamish studied him. "Who?" David looked towards the east wing. "Someone who pretended to help her." Before Hamish could ask more, footsteps sounded below. David stiffened. "That's him." "Who?" "Edward Weatherby." Hamish stared. "The dead man." David nodded. "He isn't dead." A voice came from the hall. "David." The young man stepped backward. Hamish moved in front of him. Edward Weatherby appeared at the foot of the stairs. He looked older than the photograph, but unmistakably the same man Hamish had seen in the study. His face was calm. "Macbeth," he said. "You've been busy." Edward smiled. "You've been troublesome." "I'm told that." "Give me the documents." "I haven't got them." Edward's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie." "I rarely bother." You have no idea what you're doing. I know someone murdered Miss Carter. She should have stayed away. Hamish felt his anger rise. Did you kill her? Edward did not answer. That was answer enough. David moved towards the stairs. Edward drew a pistol. Hamish raised his hands. That's unnecessary. Stay where you are. Luggs growled. Edward looked at the dog. Call him off. Hamish whistled. Luggs sat. Edward smiled. Good. Hamish glanced at David. The young man understood. He nodded. Then Hamish kicked the old umbrella stand. It crashed down the stairs. Edward flinched. David ran. Edward fired. The bullet struck the wall. Hamish lunged. They struggled on the landing. Edward was stronger than he looked. Hamish caught his wrist and twisted. The pistol fell. Edward punched him. Hamish staggered. The older man ran towards the east wing. Hamish followed. They reached the study. Edward slammed the door. Hamish heard the lock turn. He smiled. He reached into his pocket and produced the brass key. The door opened. Edward stood beside the desk with a knife. You should have left, he said. I was considering it. Edward lunged. Hamish stepped aside. The knife struck the desk. Hamish grabbed his arm. They crashed against the shelves. A bundle of papers fell. Edward stared at them. Hamish understood. The papers were what mattered. Edward released the knife and reached for them. Hamish kicked them away. Edward rushed after them. Then Blair appeared in the doorway with 2 constables. Edward Weatherby. Edward froze. Blair pointed his revolver. Drop the knife. Edward looked at Hamish. You planned this? Hamish smiled. Not exactly. Blair stared. What happened? Hamish picked up the papers. I knew Edward would return. You knew? After the shooting. Blair frowned. Hamish explained quickly. The quarry shooting was meant to silence Weatherby. Edward needed him alive because he had signed the fraud documents. But Edward needed David dead. Blair looked at Edward. You killed Miss Carter. Edward said nothing. You killed Ewan McRae 27 years ago too. Edward's face hardened. Hamish continued. You started the fire to destroy the ownership records. Ewan survived long enough to hide the evidence. Miss Carter found it. She threatened to expose you. Edward laughed bitterly. She knew too much. So you killed her. She wouldn't stop. And Weatherby? He betrayed me. Hamish looked at Blair. There it is. Blair frowned. What? The motive. Edward had not killed for money. He had killed to protect a lie that had lasted 27 years. David appeared behind the constables. He looked at Edward. Why did you kill my father? Edward stared at him. Because he refused to surrender the manor. It was never yours. Edward's expression collapsed. No, he whispered. It never was. Blair ordered the constables to arrest him as they led Edward away. Hamish looked at David. Are you all right? David nodded. Thank you. Hamish shrugged. Don't mention it. Blair stared at him. You solved this. Hamish immediately looked alarmed. No. You did. No, sir. You found the letters. Luck. You identified the killer. More luck. You saved the heir. Luggs helped. Blair looked at the dog. Luggs yawned. Blair sighed. I'll write the report. Hamish smiled. That would be best. Outside, dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. For once, Hamish felt no satisfaction at solving a murder. He felt relief. If Blair took the credit, Hamish would remain in Lockdown. That was all that mattered. He climbed into the Land Rover. Then he remembered his breakfast. The eggs had been sitting there since morning. Hamish opened the saucepan. They smelled terrible. He stared at them. Justice, he said sadly, has its price. Luggs looked at him. Hamish threw the eggs away. The morning was cold and bitterly wet. He drove towards the hotel for breakfast. Behind him, Lockdown Manor disappeared into the mist, taking its secrets with it. But Hamish knew one thing. The Highlands had a long memory, and so did he. Chapter 10. Coffee, credit, and a quiet Highland morning. By 7 o'clock the following morning, Lockdown had returned to its usual appearance. Wet, grey, windy, and suspicious. Hamish Macbeth sat in the corner of the hotel, with a mug of coffee between his hands. Luggs lay beneath the table, snoring loudly enough to make the teaspoons tremble. Hamish was content. The murderer was arrested. The heir to Lockdown Manor had been found. DCI Blair had taken charge of the official investigation, and, most importantly, nobody had suggested promoting Hamish. There were complications. Mrs. Anderson approached with a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast. You look pleased with yourself. I've got breakfast. You solved a murder. That as well. She put the plate down. Blair says you solved it. Hamish looked horrified. He said no such thing. He did. When? Last night. Hamish sighed. That's unfortunate. Mrs. Anderson smiled. You don't like praise. Praise leads to paperwork. She laughed. That isn't why you dislike it. Hamish began eating. What other reason could there be? You're afraid they'll send you away. Hamish stopped. For a moment his humor disappeared. Lockdow was small. Its roads were narrow, its people meddlesome, and its weather dreadful. Yet Hamish loved it. He loved the hills beyond the village, the dark loch, the smell of peat smoke, and the way everyone knew everyone else's business. He even loved the silence. Most of all, he loved being allowed to be himself. I don't want a city posting, he said quietly. I know. Too many people. And too much work. That too. Mrs. Anderson refilled his coffee. You needn't worry. Hamish looked up. Why? Because Blair took the credit. Hamish smiled. That was exactly what he wanted. Later that morning, Hamish walked towards Lockdow Manor. The police cars had gone. The yellow tape remained around the study, fluttering in the wind. David stood beside the front door. He looked different in daylight, less frightened, more certain. You came back. Hamish nodded. Just checking the place hasn't murdered anyone else. David laughed. I wanted to thank you. Already did. I didn't mean to. Hamish looked at him. David smiled. Thank you. Hamish shrugged. What will you do now? I don't know. The manor is yours. Apparently, you could sell it. David looked towards the hills. I don't think I want to. Hamish raised an eyebrow. That's sensible. I thought about turning it into something useful. Like what? A place for people to stay. Maybe a hotel. Hamish grimaced. There's already a hotel. David laughed. Then perhaps a private house. Better. They stood in silence. Wind moved through the trees. Your sister? Hamish asked. She is staying. Good. She wants to restore the old records. Hamish nodded. Someone should. David looked towards the manor. Do you believe my father was telling the truth? About what? That the house belonged to our family. Hamish considered. The documents suggest it did. David smiled. That's not what I asked. Hamish looked at him. Truth isn't always what people want it to be. David nodded slowly. Will you come back? Hamish smiled. If you invite me for coffee, I will. Then I probably won't. David laughed. Hamish walked away. At the gate he stopped. The mist had lifted. For the first time in days, sunlight touched the roof of the manor. Hamish glanced back. The house seemed ordinary. Just old. Old houses did not keep secrets. People did. At the station, the telephone rang. Hamish stared through the window. He considered ignoring it. It rang again. He picked up the receiver. Lockdow Police. Blair's voice came through. Macbeth. Hamish winced. Yes, sir? I've finished the report. Good. I've credited the investigation to myself. Excellent. There was a pause. You sound pleased. I am. You're an odd man. So I've been told. Blair cleared his throat. There may be a commendation. Hamish nearly dropped the receiver. A what? A commendation. I don't want one. You don't get to choose. Could you lose the paperwork? No? Hamish sighed. Worth asking. Blair laughed unexpectedly. Then his voice became serious. You did good work, Macbeth. Hamish stared at the wall. Thank you, sir. The line ended. Hamish put down the receiver. He checked the clock. It was nearly lunchtime. He reached for his coat. Lugs raised his head. Come on. The dog followed him outside. The village was waking. Fishermen moved along the harbour. Mrs. McLean was opening the post office. Angus Fraser was repairing a fence that he had probably broken himself. Hamish walked to the hotel. A gust of wind caught his coat. He grinned. It was good to be home. Inside, Mrs. Anderson had prepared stew. Hamish sat beside the window. What happened to the Weatherbys? She asked. Edward was taken to Strathbane, and Julian, hospital, and David, staying at the manor. Mrs. Anderson nodded. Good. Hamish lifted his spoon. You know, there's one thing I still don't understand. What? Why did Miss Carter trust Edward? Mrs. Anderson frowned. She thought he wanted to help. Hamish nodded. That was his greatest weapon. The door opened. Mrs. McLean entered, carrying a bundle of letters. She placed them on the counter. More trouble. Hamish looked alarmed. Don't say that. She smiled. There's a letter for you. Hamish opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Thank you for saving the truth. There was no signature. Hamish folded it. Then he noticed something at the bottom. A tiny drawing of a stag. He smiled. Perhaps some mysteries were best left alone. He finished his stew. Outside, Rain began again. Hamish looked through the window at the darkening hills. Lockdoor was quiet. For now. He settled back in his chair. Lugs slept beneath the table. The coffee was hot. The stew was good. The murderer was behind bars. And Hamish Macbeth was exactly where he wanted to be. Nowhere important. And nowhere else. For a Highland policeman, that was as close to happiness as anyone could reasonably expect. Chapter 11. The Secret That Remained. 3 days after Edward Weatherby was taken to Strathbane, Lockdoor began to forget the murder. This was not because the villagers had forgiven anyone. It was because there was always something else to discuss. Hamish was delighted. At 11 the telephone rang. He stared at it. Leaves stared at it too. "It'll be Blair," Hamish said. Leaves growled. Hamish nodded. "Exactly." The telephone rang again. Hamish answered. "Leaves police. Macbeth." Hamish sighed. "Good morning, sir. Have you heard from Leaves Manor?" "No." "That's strange." "Why?" "Because David McRae has reported something missing." Hamish sat upright. "What?" "A box." Blair ignored him. "An old wooden box, containing family papers. I want you to investigate." Hamish looked at Leaves. "Sir, I'm very busy." "Doing what?" "Paperwork. Your desk is empty." Hamish glanced at it. "That is because I'm efficient." Blair sighed. "Go to the manor." The line went dead. Hamish put on his coat. "Come on, Leaves." The dog rose reluctantly. At the manor, David met him at the door. "The box disappeared last night." "Who knew about it?" "My sister, Mrs. Anderson." "Me." "Anyone else?" David hesitated. "Perhaps." Hamish looked at him. "Who?" "Edward knew the family papers existed. He's in custody." "I know." "Then who else?" David led him into the library. A bookcase stood against one wall. One section had been disturbed. Hamish examined the floor. Dust had been moved. "Someone climbed here." David nodded. "The box was behind those books." Hamish touched the shelf. "Why didn't they take the other papers?" "I don't know." Hamish smiled. "Then it's probably not theft." David frowned. "Someone wanted one thing." "What's inside the box?" "Letters. Accounts. Old family records. Anything about Edward?" "Yes." "Then someone may want to destroy them." Hamish walked to the window. Outside, a figure moved near the garden wall. He pointed. "Who is that?" David looked. "I don't know." Hamish went outside. The figure had disappeared. He followed footprints across the wet grass. They led to the old greenhouse. Inside, he found a woman. Fiona McRae. She looked startled. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you." "Why?" "Because things keep disappearing." She lowered her eyes. "I took the box." Hamish blinked. "You?" "Yes." "Why?" "To protect David." "From whom?" Fiona hesitated. "From himself." Hamish frowned. She explained. "The box contains proof that my father wasn't the only victim. There was another person involved." "Who?" "My mother." Hamish stared. "She helped start the fire." "No. She helped hide the truth." Fiona's voice trembled. "She believed David would be killed if anyone knew he survived. So she changed his name, sent him away, and destroyed every record she could find. Then why keep the box? Because she couldn't destroy everything. David knows." "No. Why not?" "Because he wants a simple answer." Hamish looked towards the manor. "There aren't many simple answers here." Fiona handed him the wooden box. "I want you to give it to him." Hamish accepted it. "You could have told him yourself." "I was afraid." "Of what?" "That he would hate her." Hamish looked at the box. "People often hate the people who save them." Fiona nodded. "Will you tell him?" "Aye." He returned to the manor. David was waiting. "Did you find it?" Hamish held out the box. "Aye." David opened it. Inside were letters, photographs, and an old diary. He read the first page. His face changed. Hamish waited. After several minutes, David looked up. "My mother knew." "Aye." "She thought my father was going to die." "Aye." "She sent me away." "Aye." David closed his eyes. "She saved me." Hamish nodded. "I suppose she did." David looked at him. "Why didn't she tell me?" "Fear." "Fear of what?" "Losing you." David sat down. For several minutes he said nothing. Then he smiled sadly. "I don't hate her." Hamish felt relieved. "Good. Do you think she knew I would survive?" "I think she hoped." David opened the diary again. A small photograph fell out. It showed a woman holding a little boy. On the back was written, "My son, wherever you are." Remember that you were loved. David pressed the photograph to his chest. Hamish turned away. Some things did not require a policeman. Later that afternoon, Hamish returned to the village. Mrs. McLean was waiting outside the post office. Well? Everything's settled. Who stole the box? Fiona. Why? To protect David. Mrs. McLean nodded. I thought so. Hamish stared. You knew? I suspected. Then why didn't you tell me? You didn't ask. Hamish sighed. That was Lockdo. Everyone knew something. Nobody told him until it suited them. He walked to the hotel. Mrs. Anderson served coffee without asking. You look thoughtful. I've had a busy day. Another murder? No. Then why so serious? Hamish looked through the window. The mountains stood dark beneath the evening sky. Sometimes, he said, finding the truth doesn't make things easier. Mrs. Anderson smiled. No. But it makes them honest. Hamish considered that. Then he lifted his cup. To honesty. She raised hers. To staying out of trouble. Hamish laughed. Outside, the wind moved through Lockdo. The manor stood silent on the hill. Its secrets were not gone. They never would be, but the worst of them had finally been spoken aloud. Hamish leaned back. For once, he did not think about murder. He thought about supper. He thought about the rain. He thought about tomorrow. And he thought, with quiet satisfaction, that nobody in Strathbane had mentioned promotion. For a moment, Hamish allowed himself to enjoy the thought. He had solved the case, protected David, and avoided promotion. In Lockdo, that counted as a remarkably successful week by any reasonable measure of Highland policing. That was enough. For Hamish Macbeth, enough was very nearly happiness. Chapter 12. The Last Secret at Lockdo Manor. The following Saturday began with sunshine, which Hamish considered suspicious. Lockdo was not designed for sunshine. The village looked almost embarrassed beneath the blue sky. The loch glittered, gulls complained above the harbour, and the hills stood green beneath the morning. Hamish sat outside the hotel with coffee. Lugs slept beneath his chair. Then David McRae arrived. Hamish looked up. You've got that expression. What expression? The one people wear before giving me work. David laughed. I've brought you something. Hamish sighed. David placed an envelope on the table. I found it inside the wooden box. Hamish stared at it. Another secret? Yes. Can't you people ever keep ordinary things? David shook his head. The envelope was old and yellowed. Across the front was written one name, Ewan. Hamish opened it carefully. Inside was a letter written by Ewan McRae shortly before the fire. He had discovered something hidden beneath the manor chapel, a stone plaque bearing the names of everyone who had worked at the estate for more than a century. Hamish frowned. Whose? David looked at him. Agnes Weatherby. Hamish blinked. Lady Agnes. David nodded. She wasn't the owner. What? She inherited the manor through her mother, but the Weatherby family changed the records. They wanted people to believe she had no surviving relatives. Hamish leaned back. So the entire dispute began with a lie. Aye. That's disappointing. I was hoping for buried treasure. David smiled. There may still be some. Hamish immediately became interested. Where? Under the chapel. They drove to the manor. The old chapel stood behind the house, half hidden by ivy. Its roof had collapsed years earlier, but the stone walls remained. Hamish entered. Dust covered the floor. David pointed towards the altar. Ewan wrote that the plaque was beneath it. Hamish examined the stones. One was loose. He pried it up. Beneath it lay a narrow cavity. Inside was a bronze plaque. Hamish lifted it. Names covered the surface. Servants, gardeners, gamekeepers, maids. And at the bottom, one name had been scratched away. David touched the damaged place. Agnes. Hamish nodded. Then he noticed something behind the plaque. A small leather pouch. He opened it. Inside was a silver ring, bearing the Weatherby crest. David stared. What does that prove? Nothing. Hamish turned the ring over. There was an inscription inside. For Agnes, with all my love, Edward. David went pale. Edward loved her. Apparently. But why would he destroy her inheritance? Hamish thought for a moment. Perhaps he didn't. David looked confused. Perhaps he didn't. Hamish explained. Maybe someone else did. They searched the chapel. Behind a cracked stone they discovered another letter. This one was from Lady Agnes. She wrote that she had married Edward Weatherby secretly. She had feared her family would reject him because he had no title and little money. But Edward had not betrayed her. Someone had forged the documents. Someone had wanted the manor. Hamish read the final paragraph. His expression changed. What? Hamish handed him the letter. David read silently. The culprit was Agnes's brother, he said. Aye. But he died before the fire. Yes. Then why continue the lie? Hamish looked towards the manor. Because people inherited it. The mystery had become older than any living suspect. The Weatherby family had carried a lie through generations because the truth was inconvenient. Edward Weatherby had killed to protect it. Miss Carter had died because she discovered it. Ewan McCrae had died because he tried to expose it. And David had spent his life believing himself nobody because someone had decided that truth was less valuable than property. Hamish looked at the young man. You know what this means? David shook his head. The manor belongs to you. David smiled. No. Hamish raised an eyebrow. I think it belongs to everyone who lived here. They returned to the village. By evening, the story had spread. Mrs. McLean knew within 20 minutes, Mrs. Anderson within 10, and Angus Fraser before Hamish had finished his supper. The villagers gathered at the hotel. David stood beside the fireplace. He announced that he would keep the manor and restore it as a place where visitors could stay, but he would also preserve the old records and open the chapel to the public. Mrs. McLean applauded. Angus grunted approvingly. Mrs. Anderson smiled. Hamish remained at the back. He preferred it there. Then the door opened. Blair entered. Hamish immediately looked worried. Macbeth, sir, I've brought news. Hamish glanced at the ceiling. Bad news? No. Good news? Possibly. Blair handed him a letter. Hamish read it. Then he looked up. A commendation? Yes. Can I refuse? No. Can I lose it? No. Hamish sighed. Blair smiled. You're impossible. So I've been told. Blair turned towards the villagers. The report credits me with solving the case. Hamish smiled. Excellent. Blair looked at him. You're not angry? Because I'm staying. Blair laughed. That's the strangest reason I've ever heard. Blair shook his head. Good night, Macbeth. Good night, sir. After Blair left, Hamish returned to his table. Mrs. Anderson brought coffee. You're pleased? Aye. Why? No promotion. She laughed. You really are a strange man. Hamish looked towards the window. The manor stood peacefully beneath the moon, its windows glowing warmly. For generations, people had hidden behind money, names, fear, and silence. Now the house had something better, a future. Hamish lifted his coffee. To Lockdo. Lugs raised his head beneath the table. Hamish looked down, and to you, the dog yawned. Rain began tapping against the windows. Hamish smiled. The case was finished. The secrets had been uncovered. The manor had found its rightful heir, and Lockdo was quiet again. That was all Hamish wanted. A warm room, a good meal, a loyal dog, and absolutely no reason for anyone in Strathbane to remember his name. He finished his coffee. Tomorrow, he decided, he would do nothing. It was the most sensible thing a policeman could do. Hamish closed his eyes. For once, nobody called, nobody shouted, nobody was murdered, and the secret at Lockdo Manor finally belonged to the past.